Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's November 12th. This is the Finance Committee meeting, and my first order of the day is to make sure that everyone can hear and we can hear them because we're conducting this meeting virtually. So I will start by just going around the room that I can, as I see people. So Bob,
Present.
Councilor Haneke,
Present.
Andy,
Present.
and Joe.
Present.
And Alicia has not told me she can't come, but I think we'll go ahead and start the meeting. Great. Alicia has joined us. Alicia, I just went around to make sure everyone could hear and be heard. Can you let us know if you can hear us and we can hear you?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, good morning, everyone. The first item, the way we organize our agenda is public comments, but I don't see any attendees. So we'll make it the last item on our agenda in case their public shows up toward the end. So we have two main topics. The first being more a review with the financial indicators that Sean presented on Monday night. And so I wanted to focus on some questions that were raised during that meeting and any other questions that we have now. And I have one comment on it that is a segue into the second item was guidelines. So, for the financial indicators, I think the main thing that I think we all should focus on is at the very end. There are two tables. There's a table of projected revenues and projected expenditures. So as needed, we can pull those up. So I see Mandy, Councilor Haneke has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the projected revenues first so that maybe we don't jump around too much.
Sure.
I want to say thank you. I think I said this at the council meeting during the meeting, but it looks like local receipts are closer. And because we went down to 3 years, it looks like, that's where a 13.1% year-over-year increase in local receipts from budget to projected is something that I think this committee last year, Sean, you weren't here, this committee pushed hard last year on getting that number closer to the actuals from, what would be if we're budgeting for FY27, the 25 actuals, because that's where a lot of our excess revenue that contributes to that has been coming from. And I know it's been hard after COVID. So I'm glad and pleased to see that number is pushed a little higher. I guess, one question with that, and then I want to go to the property tax side, would be, given the uncertainty in the environment, pushing those numbers higher, are you still comfortable with pushing them as high as you did, given who knows what's going on a national level economic wise, right? And those are very much economic indicators, as you said. So that's one question for local receipts. But property tax revenues, I know we've heard a lot about this in the last 5 days. And I have a couple of questions related to this. We're in the FY26 budget year. That new growth number that we budgeted presumably includes a building that now is rubble. And you had already indicated that you thought that 650 was going to be 400 for this current fiscal year. So how much lower are we now in terms of that? And then another question about the current budget year, and then I'll go to the projecteds. The base levy, my understanding is it stays the same no matter what any one assessment is, such that the 18.5 million or whatever Olympia Place was assessed at will obviously dramatically decrease, but the base levy stays the same. And since we haven't actually set the tax rates yet, does that mean despite them having to pay a whole lot less when we set the tax rates, we can expect at least the base levy and 2.5 increase, maybe not the estimated new growth, to be what we budgeted? It's just that the tax rates of the other taxpayers will be going higher, or do we actually have to decrease the base levy too? So that's a question there. And then corollary FY27 that you presented, that base levy is based on our budgeted FY26 levy limit. How's that going to change in the financial indicator projections? And will the new growth number also change? So is our base levy for the projected FY27 going to be less than that 69.6 million? And are we rethinking our estimated new growth for FY27 too? I know that was a lot.
Let me, I had a feeling the property tax questions would come up. So let me start with those. And then Kathy, if I can go to the local receipts after. So for FY26, the property owner will likely file for an abatement, and that abatement will come out of our overlay or our reserve for abatements and exemption. So every year, you know how we set aside that 0.5%. So whatever that amount is, which our assessor is working on, thinking about now, and we'll, look into once we receive the abatement request, that would come out of that. So it wouldn't change what we're, it wouldn't change our numbers for this year. The only concern there a little bit is, do we have enough in that reserve for abatement and exemptions? Because we haven't had, a loss like this, maybe ever, but definitely not from one single property. So that's something we're looking at, is if that reserve is insufficient for any reason, what are our options after that? We have prior year reserves that have funds available in them, and so for those years. And so we're looking into, can we go to prior year reserve for abatements? But that's what would happen this year, is that we would.
Sean, can I just ask you, is that a legal question? If we have reserves in prior years, we have to have permission to use them, or?
I just need to, again, we haven't had to do that.
Okay.
Definitely not since I've been here, and I don't know, in the past. So our assessor is talking with the state about what is that process. If for whatever reason the reserve is insufficient this year because of this, unique situation, what is the protocol for, at that point, accessing prior years? So I can update you on that. She's going to look into that today. So that's this year. So it wouldn't change our projections or revenues necessarily for this year. That's why we have that reserve, because we know there's going to be some amount of abatements and exemptions each year, but this will just be much more. Future years, and Councilor Haneke, you kind of touched on this.
Yeah.
So let's say if the property is rebuilt some point in the future, the value is going to go down as long as the property is the way it is, where it's basically just land and a foundation. So the value of that property, if it stays low, will carry over into next year. And essentially the levy itself doesn't change. How it may be allocated across the properties is what would change. So instead of having a $30 million or $20 million building, to kind of soak up the tax levy, that will have to be spread out across the remaining properties. So the tax levy itself would not change, but how it is distributed and collected across the various properties might change, because now you have a property that's not paying as much into that tax levy. If the property is rebuilt, then it might be a temporary impact. If the property is not rebuilt, then it would be a longer lasting impact. So for this year, it comes out of overlay. For next year, the base that we assume for total assessed values of different properties versus the tax levy, it'll change the distribution because we won't have that value there.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
About FY26? We haven't set the tax rate yet. So I guess I'm confused as to why it has to come out of abatement instead of changing the tax rate for this year. Is it because the tax rate is set based on the assessed values as of July 1, even though we haven't actually, as a council, passed the tax rate yet? So we can't sort of reset those.
Yeah. So
the time, I think is that what it is?
I can ask the assessor that question. The timing is challenging because we haven't actually received an abatement request, and we're trying to set the tax rate. You're doing the classification hearing Monday, right? So she's going to talk to the state about that, and I can see what options we have.
But I think the assessments are based on date certain, what was there on that specific
as
date.
Of the start of the year, yeah.
July 1 or January 1, whatever the date is. And then the process is, but that building's no longer there. Then you file for the abatement. And I think,
so we can get an FAQ for a couple of these questions, because I think it'll come up
Monday,
together this week.
Okay, thank you.
And then on the new growth, I think part of your question was new growth. So yeah, our new growth this year, I was just looking at it, is going to be, where is it? $391,318. So, for the first time in a while, it's under our estimate. As of right now, I'm comfortable with up to Paul and the council ultimately with the 650. We did have a conversation with the building commissioner and what property developments are out there. There are a few that are anticipated to begin construction and potentially come online next year. We may not get all of the value of those projects, but we can do partial. So if there, so much of the building is constructed, we can get so much of that as new growth. So there are 2 or 3 larger ones that potentially could come online and add to our new growth next year. So I think we would leave it where it is. I wouldn't really want to go higher just because we don't, because of this year and not knowing the exact timing of those projects.
Sean, what were we estimating? What was the estimate?
650.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, Joe, I don't know whether people want to see these tables. I had them open in another window, so it's the table at the end of the financial indicator. There's a revenue
Okay.
table.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you go, if you scroll all the way down, yeah.
And if you want me to share my screen at any point, let me know. I can share my screen.
Okay.
So that's
Can I follow up on the new growth? The budget indicators FY27 projection uses the FY26 end of budget levy limit of 69.6 that includes the 2.5 increase and 650 as new growth. And that's what you just popped forward to FY27's projection.
Yep.
When we see the next set of budget projections, will that number be lower when when will we adjust that 650 down to 391 to change the base levy?
Yeah, we'll update the new growth number.
So that means our base levy is going down by at least 250 or 60K plus 2.5%.
Right.
Okay. So that puts the projections automatically doubles the shortfall from what we're looking at now.
But I do have an update. So
Thank you.
So on the local receipts, these numbers are going to evolve over the next couple months. And so one thing on the local receipts that's improved is I did find something in my spreadsheet. There was a hidden column that was not there previously, but it's on me for not seeing that. So the 3-year average for motor vehicle excise tax and hotel, motel, meals excise was actually a 4-year average. And it was including something it was really including a budget figure, not an actual figure. So when I removed that from the 3-year average, it brought those up a little bit. So those are going to go up, and I'll share this out after the meeting so you can have the revised numbers. But the revised numbers where is it? Let's see. And again, these could continue to ebb and flow a little bit, but the motor vehicle excise tax is about 2.1 instead of around 2, so it went up about 100,000. And the hotel, motel, and meals excise, instead of being at about 820, is about 890. So it went up about $200,000 when I corrected that. So that will offset some of that adjustment in the new growth.
And so if anyone wants Sean to show this, I mean, I'm staring at those numbers. So it's one thing went down and 2 things went up. So the bottom line.
Yeah, it's going to fluctuate a little bit.
Bottom line negative stays roughly the same.
Is that relatively common? I mean, like in our past, I mean, what was kind of the reasoning, Sean, do you think that our new growth was almost half of what we estimated? Was there any one thing that stood out? And forgive me if this is a dumb question.
No, I mean, I would say new growth we're always very conservative in new growth because it's based on development and new buildings and the timing of when those buildings, how fast they're constructed. So the nice thing about new growth is that it always gets caught up the next year. Okay. So let's say we budget 650, it comes in at $1 million. That extra money comes into the base the next year. So it's really 1 year at a time. And then any additional gets built in automatically the following year. Okay. So like to Councilor Haneke's point, this year it's going the other way, but that's getting built into the base automatically when it.
And the only thing that it does is in the year that happens, it potentially produces an excess, end of the year excess.
Yeah.
And so because it's an underestimate of revenues, so that line has been generating some excess, but the others, motor vehicle excise and hotel, they were generating big, budgets came in much higher than projected. And then the other one Mandy didn't mention was investment income. And my understanding is the base on which we were earning that investment income has gone down, which is why you're doing better than the projection for FY26, but not nearly what it was, what the actual came in.
Yeah, investment income is the one area where we may want to revise it down. And so my concern is just what you said, that we're using a base that we're not going to have. And it's really, do we want to build operating budgets on something that potentially could go lower, or likely will go lower? So, we're definitely not, I definitely wouldn't recommend building it on the 2 million number that we had in FY25. And, but even if you go back as recent as FY23. So in FY23, we had brought in about $700,000. And then if you go back to FY22, it was like 100, 120. So this, this increase in interest income is really a recent update, or a recent phenomenon. And it's a good thing. Again, a lot of it's related to these building projects, and we have costs for those building projects that we can, this will help with. But it's really about especially, and same thing with the new growth. This is about long term. What do we want to build our operating budgets, our recurring expenses year over year on, that we feel really confident is not going to ever go down, where we have to then pivot and make cuts because of it. So the investment comes in one area where we brought it up. I think if we see the Fed continue to reduce rates, and that's an area we might want to consider adjusting downward. Again, if we bring in more money than what's budgeted, we know we have this, these building projects coming up that it can help with if the council wants to use it that way. But it's really about, do we want to have recurring expenses built on it? And that's the question we have to, that we need to discuss.
And Bob.
Yeah, I'm concerned about estimates of new growth, given the fire that we had. Paul, are we considering any changes in building codes or density of buildings allowed, which could slow development in general as developers react to the new codes?
So I don't know if there'll be new codes. Certainly, our expectations for safety around construction sites is being looked at. We actually had an enhanced safety expectation around the Jones Library, which costs more money for the library project, mainly because of the proximity to the historic building and other buildings downtown. So that's something that we will look at. Also, there will be a discussion about the density on Olympia Drive, most likely. Those properties are valued at the highest and best use, basically, and so if we look at that, I mean, and we have to look at our infrastructure as well. So we're having a meeting tomorrow with our core team to sort of walk through what are the things that should be on the table. We sort of anecdotally have collected some of these, but I just want the entire team to say, well, what else are we thinking about that might impact us long term? So yeah, I mean, we're looking at everything, after not just the operations of the response to the fire, but also the infrastructure that was there, and what's the impact if the infrastructure is deemed, inadequate or whatever,
And I guess just to add to Bob's, is that sprinkler systems, they weren't, at least one article said they were not industrial level, they were another level that was permitted, but like.
I don't know what that didn't make any sense to
that
me.
matters
So
anymore.
they had a fully compliant sprinkler system
Yeah.
that was operational.
Yeah.
And it's just to clarify, so sprinkler systems, what I'm told is they're designed to buy time, not to put out fire. They can extinguish a trash can fire or something like that,
Right.
but it's really to buy time so people can evacuate.
Get out of the building. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mandy.
Two other questions on this revenue side. In local receipts, there's a miscellaneous section. And that, I believe, includes strategic partnership agreements that I know last year we pulled a lot of that. The budget for FY26 is much lower than the actuals in FY25, and I think looking at my own notes, it's because we pulled a lot of the SPA stuff out of the operating revenue because of its designated special purposes and all. Is that still why that number of projection for FY27 is 165 and not, 300,000 lower than the 460 in actuals? Is it, or is there, since we don't have a fourth quarter or all, what caused the 463 in FY24 actuals that isn't being budgeted in 25 and 26, I guess is a question. In 25 that isn't being budgeted in 26 and 27, is it just that change in accounting for SPA? And similarly, the other financing sources, there's a 430 actual in FY25. That is budgeted at 75, which I believe is the Comcast agreement in FY26, but doesn't have any budget in FY27. And so what's in the FY25 actuals of 430 that doesn't move on to FY27? Because that's almost $500,000. And is the Comcast agreement up? Is that why we're no longer even budgeting the 75,000 in the miscellaneous line of other financing sources in FY27?
So on the miscellaneous revenue, so there's the things that are included there. What actuals were you looking at, 25 or 2024? It was 25, right?
25 was the one that was 450.
Yeah.
And then
So opioid money is in there, and that, while it's in the actuals, at least back then, I don't believe we had a fund set up. So the money was coming in as a general fund revenue going to free cash, but that money has to be transferred in, and you've already done some of that, I believe, has to be transferred into the special revenue fund that we set up for opioid mitigation. So a big chunk of it, 90 grand in that year, was opioid money, and that will continue to happen unless I got to look at it and see if we can deposit the revenue directly into the special revenue fund.
I think the state law, the state regulations
changed, so we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's at least back in FY25. That's what was happening. That will likely not happen going forward. What's still in miscellaneous is UMass occupancy fee. So they pay us an occupancy fee for the hotel on a quarterly basis. So that's really the main revenue source that's still there. Your point about strategic partnership agreements, that's what really is the rest of the difference. And that's because we have these new strategic partnership agreements that are much more specific about how the funds are used. So UMass, for example, 200 in their agreement, 200,000 is specifically for the schools. So that goes into a gift fund for the schools. 100,000 is for housing. So we have a special fund set up that will be focused on housing, housing safety and supporting the inspections department. And 700,000 is specifically for fire and EMS. And so that goes into our ambulance fund. And the only thing that's left over is there's a small amount, 25,000, that's sort of for economic development, and that's still showing up in this miscellaneous section. On the Amherst College side, their new agreement has 250,000 for the schools, 250,000 for roads, sidewalks, and public infrastructure improvements in the business improvement district. So again, it's more specific in some ways than what we used to get. And then specifically 250,000 for fire and EMS. So really that's the big difference, are those strategic partnership, the funding streams where they're flowing and they're going into gift funds essentially set up for these specific purposes.
And the money for ambulance under Amherst College, they've always paid us money for ambulance, but we just sort of made it, instead of us calculating it every time, we just sort of rounded up basically, and it's a fixed sum every year.
I have a question just on the fire and ambulance, the ambulance fund. Where does that show up? So including when we did the audit report a few years ago, there was something called ambulance fund, but I don't think we ever, we see the receipts paying for things in the capital budget, but do we have something that one can look at that money in, money out? I'm not asking for that now, but it's
Yeah.
because
No, we can give an update on that for sure. And where you see it every year is the, and this kind of leads into the next question, the other financing sources, that transfer in, that's, where we talk about it generally. That other so for FY 27, we're proposing $3 million. That's coming in from the ambulance fund. So the ambulance fund is a receipts reserve for appropriations fund. I'll channel my inner Sonia because she explained this several times. Which basically means you have to have the money in the fund before you can appropriate it. So it's sort of like a forward-looking fund. You've got to have, whatever you appropriate, you've got to have that in hand at the time you appropriate it. So the 3 million is, was, we had enough in the fund at that point. Some years we do ambulances out of that fund, so it's not just for supporting the operations of the the fire department and the EMS team, but it's also for replacing ambulances as well.
and so that means, so when we're seeing 3 million, that means there's at least 3 million in that
Yeah.
fund.
Yep.
And so that what my question is how much more there is, but we don't need to do that.
Yeah, no, we
today.
can do,
Like,
again, if you want to put it, we can give you an
Okay.
update on how that fund is, the history of that fund.
So just to be clear, so that's money that the council appropriates every June. That's in part of your orders that you order, but the revenue that comes in from that are the runs that when the ambulance makes a run, we charge the insurance companies and they pay us, and that goes into that fund. So it's dedicated to the work that's being done.
Yeah, no, I kind of knew where the money came from, but Paul, so it's just like, do we have 5 million and we're pulling 3 million out, or do we have 3.5 and we're, on it, we're draining it each year or not? Is all I'm asking, and I don't need to know that now. But just a sense of what that fund looks like.
Sure. And then I think the other question was on the miscellaneous. So the miscellaneous, 75,000 was Comcast, and there was a transfer in for 355. I've got to do a little digging into that. Generally, those transfer ins means maybe there was a free cash appropriation or something in FY25 that was sort of a mid-year occurrence typically, or maybe the capital plan was built assuming some transfer in from free cash. Actually, it might have been, I think you drew from free cash to fund the school, right?
Yep.
A one-time appropriation. So that's part of it. And there might have been another piece from free cash for capital. So we don't build the budget on that. That's sort of a year-to-year conversation. And then the Comcast money, so was it, Paul, at the end of December 2026
Yep.
is and I'll double check that, but that money actually specifically funds a debt obligation for iNet for the fiber project that was done. So we get that money from Comcast, and that money, it's basically like the CPA money. It kind of comes in and goes out. So whatever we budget there is what we're anticipating, will go towards the debt from that iNet project. So when that iNet project was fully paid off, which I believe is around the same time, that's, until we have a new agreement, we won't know what the next amount looks like.
So Andy.
I was just going to follow up on that. I would not be optimistic about being able to even hold the amount we get from Comcast in the next round. I think that the industry has changed such that the cable television fees that fund that are probably going down for them. And unless there's a statutory change that allows us to get revenue from the internet, but that's I just don't see it being happening.
So other questions on indicators, either revenues or expenses? I have one thing I want to point out on expenses, but Bob, you go first.
Yeah, I have a question about where the CPA tax that residents pay. Where is this? Where is this in here? And then where is the CPA money we get from the state? I don't see. I'm trying to figure out what it is.
So CPA, the revenue we collect is not part of this budget. We have a separate fund that all the surcharge revenue and the state revenue goes into that fund, CPA fund, and then the CPA committee will make a recommendation and the council will approve it, and it comes out of separate funds. The only thing you do see here, and it's just the way the law requires it, is any CPA debt is technically part of the CPA fund or part of this budget. It's just always been that way. So what you'll see is in the other financing sources, that's actually a transfer in from the CPA revolving fund to pay for the debt. And then on the expense side, you'll see a number that matches that. So it's basically a transfer in and transfer out only for the debt funded projects for CPA. Most of the projects that CPA approves, are not from debt. So you don't see all of it, but so basically all the receipts you won't see here. This is only the amount that is needed to pay for the debt.
Okay.
Okay, so I wanted to point out in the expense side that the 3.5% for the elementary school excludes the one-time money. So that I'm just bringing that up because it's a segue to discussion about the indicators, and that if it was in the base, it's about 9,430,000 more. So if that was part of the elementary school base. So I have a question that it just occurred to me. I should have thought about Monday night too, but you've got a column called FY25 actual now. If I look at actual versus what we had budgeted, do I start to get a sense of what you're going to be telling us when you close down the year, the fourth quarter, and free cash? Because the actual revenue, I just did a quick comparison, actual revenue was higher than what we had projected. So that's just a question on the timing on when we're going to see that close out.
Yeah. So you're getting a sense what we will potentially add to free cash from the revenue side. The expense side is still budget figures, mainly because I wanted to show the full allocation for the town, the elementary schools, and the Jones Library. We haven't gone in yet to look at how much they spent. I mean, we're starting to do that now, but we've got some other reports we're wrapping up for FY25. So for expenses, it's still budget. For revenues, it's actuals. So again, you're getting a sense of how much we might add to free cash from the revenue side. You don't have that yet on the expense side.
Okay,
which we know will be significant because we used ARPA funding as well in FY25 to reduce health insurance costs. So there, again, I think my estimate is going to be somewhere around 10 million from FY25.
Yeah, no, so I see you've labeled one actual on the on the expense you did budget, and the quick on revenue shows that extra. So I just wanted to point those two things out as because the other discussion somewhere between now and the end of the year is what we want to do with that money. So Mandy.
Yeah, when you report actuals for FY25, presumably the town's $29.5 million budget will be about $3.5 million at a minimum lower because the ARPA will show up as not spent, sort of, right? I think that's where it'll show up, in the operating side of the town, not under retirement systems, I think. And so is there a way to sort of find a way to report in this sheet that maybe it goes in the
that it's
assumptions or
anomaly.
Notes.
We can footnote it.
You weren't here last year, but we get a lot of people that say the town's not spending what it budgeted. It should budget less so that we can, it should decrease its budget so that we can increase other people's budgets. And a number that shows, instead of 28, instead of 20, if we budgeted 28.3 million and we only spent 22 million, they're going to say, wow, that's 6 million that could go somewhere else, or at least 3 or 4 million of that, right? And I think we have to find a way to note that of that 22 really was 25 or 26 to make up some numbers, so please find a way when you report actuals to do that.
yeah. And likewise, I think we spent some of it already, right? I think some of we did a free cash appropriation for the Bang Center, which essentially was spending that kind of pre-spending, that savings
Yeah.
before it gets to free cash. So
But
Um,
we pre-spent a chunk of it, Sean, out of free cash. Actually, we drew down on free cash.
right.
And then we put this big amount of ARPA over in the health insurance line. You know, it was more than a bit unusual. As Mandy said, this isn't going to happen very often.
Mhm.
Now, I just want to say one thing about CPA money, Bob. I haven't attended the meetings yet. I was going to for CPAC, but each year they get what is the total revenue from the surcharge and what did the state actually pay in, because that's not always a straight. And so you can see it in their budget for the current year and going backwards, but that how much the state puts in isn't always, do we get the full amount that we thought we were going to get, but they get it about this time of year, Sean, right? Because that's where the committee is then looking at how much they have to spend.
Yeah, and so we actually did that at last Thursday, Bob. So
Okay.
if so it's in the packet for that meeting, but if you want to, if you can't find it for whatever reason, email me and I can send it to you. It's the summary sheet of what we're expecting for revenues next year. So not only are we looking at what we're going to collect this year for state reimbursements, but we're estimating, what we're going to collect next year as well. And it's a very small figure relative to the total surcharge. It's, in the $400,000 range, which is nowhere near, a 50-50 match.
Yeah, so that's why I said, so you know what it potentially could be, but the state has never come up. So that's usually when I was watching the committee, it's one of the question mark ones that is a proxy. But you do know it at the point the committee is voting on this year's, the coming year's projects. And Mandy.
Yeah, question about the capital budget, particularly the debt assessment for the region. Is that 800,000 figure, all four towns just approved debt for the middle school roof that will come on presumably in FY27, given when it's going. And so is this 800,000 a decent estimate of that, or are we potentially facing more? Question number one. Question number two, last year we asked the school, and then I was talking to, I believe, John Trickey at Four Towns. We asked the school why the region always borrows for all of its capital projects, including the ones that are only 10, 20, $30,000 or, say $50,000. Capital projects, if they were from the elementary school or a town, we'd never borrow for, we would pay cash with. And we asked, is there a way for the region to sort of do a cash capital assessment to the towns? And they didn't have an answer. So I'm going to ask you, since you say that, is there a way for them to do that such that maybe we can save some sort of costs on region capital, number one? And Don Trickey, I think at Four Towns, said we would be receiving some sort of financial order or some request or something, because Pelham is trying to pay cash for its portion of the middle school roof. And so if that's a possibility for a big project like that, is that something, and apparently all four towns have to approve it or something. I wasn't exactly sure what was going on, but they're trying to pay cash instead of having their portion borrowed, and there's all sorts of things. Is that something that we as a town might want to begin exploring for our portion of all the tiny projects, such that we start paying cash instead of debt on all of this? So it's kind of one big, large, how do we manage the region's capital commitments to make it as financially beneficial as possible to our town?
Yeah, so we're actually meeting this afternoon with our the financial advisor that we have, David Eisenthal, is also the financial advisor for the region. So meeting myself with the school folks and believe some of the other four town representatives to talk about the Pelham prepay or cash upfront option. Some of the issues with the regional agreement, we have an old regional agreement that hasn't been updated. So some of these things aren't really spelled out in a way that gives, very clear guidance. And So not blaming that, but I don't believe there's anything in the regional agreement. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but I don't think there's been anything in the regional agreement that talks about options for funding capital that don't include debt. But we did try to do it in a way when I was there. We would use bond anticipation notes, which are very short term, and then instead of rolling those into a permanent bond, we would assess the towns and pay those bands off quicker. So to your point, if we had a really small project, we might pay the band off the next year. So there's ways to kind of, it is a puzzle, and working with the four towns and balancing it and projecting it out, and also trying to keep it not, so there's not spikes and valleys all the time, is one of the challenges for the region. The $800,000 figure. So part of what we're doing this afternoon too is the region is going out for a bond this December, I believe, and it's got a bunch of projects from the past that are going to be rolled into that bond. And once that bond is set, we'll know our repayment schedule for a whole bunch of projects. That bond, from what I saw, doesn't include the full cost of the roof, because I think because they haven't fully started it yet, so it's got a small portion of the roof. So we'll know we'll have a good baseline of what our debt's going to be for a while for the projects that have been approved in the past. That won't include the full cost of the roof yet. So that'll be the floor, and then there will be some amount above and beyond that we'll have to work with the region to estimate. So I would say the 800,000, it's higher than prior years, and it's higher because we're assuming an increase for the roof. But ultimately, it's going to come down to how many years they borrow for, what interest rates they get, and what the final costs come in at once they bid the project out. So I will. This number is another one that will likely shift a little bit before it's final, based on conversations we have with the region.
And you're not, I mean, since they have to bid out the roof and then the construction happens, so Mandy's on how much of a full year debt hits FY 27 is like, when is the first payment on that debt owed?
Right.
Mandy, I was trying to figure out when, by FY 28, we're clearly going to be carrying the full cost of it. So is it 3/4 of the cost, or half, on something, on how much?
Yeah.
And since the debt we'd be carrying is going to be more than the debt we had originally written in, there's some one subtracted from the other. So Shannon had thought that might have update on that 10-year capital numbers in December. Sean, is when,
Okay.
what she
Yeah,
said at one
that's
point.
where we would take our lead, is from the data they give us for their debt schedule. So I think they still prepare a capital plan that would have a projected debt schedule associated with that, and she would update that with the based on conversations with the financial advisor. So once we get that, we can adjust this number, and if we don't get it, I'll talk to her.
And so, Mandy, your other on cash question was not just could they cash it out on small ones, but was also is what Pelham is thinking of doing. Of course, their amount is so much smaller than ours. Is like, would it ever make sense for us to be saying to the region, we want to do this in cash rather than, so you're going to have answers to those questions soon, which is great.
Yeah.
So anything else on revenues and expenditure side before we turn to topic 2? Mandy?
Oh, I just want an estimate of when our retirement system assessment will be totally known. I believe it's a projection right now.
Oh,
When do we get the number?
Sometime this month. They release the appropriation letter this month that includes the number for next year. So we'll know it very, very soon. And there was a question, I can share the answer now. There was a question about who, at the financial indicators meeting, who sets the fully funded date. And I mentioned that our system is on track for 2032. And I talked with the chair of that board, and he said their funding schedule is what sets it. If they want to make it 2033 or 2034, they would adjust their funding schedule. So there is some flexibility, and they're actually already looking at potentially adjusting their funding schedule to stretch it out a little bit longer. they're looking at how to gradually get to full funding. And so that could, again, potentially, maybe not this year, but in future years, lower the annual increases a little bit, or start to shift them to little decreases year over year.
Andy?
Just because it's a big number and it's been a contentious problem for all municipalities. Health insurance, I assume, is still a big unknown that could have huge impacts, but we won't know until January or February.
Yeah, Paul, I don't know if you have any new information to share, but we're still, we're anticipating double digits again. It'll, it's going to be the biggest cost driver that we probably have this year for our budgets.
Can I ask?
So, Stephanie, I respond to that. So, yeah, so Maya is going through they have a lot of complications this year, especially as they look at new members who want to join from Hampshire County, but there's also multiple other regional groups that are in the same situation, if it may not even be public. And there's also a lot of questions with Blue Cross, because you see they have a major negotiation going on with UMass Medical that controls a lot of Central Mass recipients. So there's a lot of things in place. They know it's going to most likely be double digits, and it depends on your how well you're doing in terms of claims and which end of the spectrum you are on that.
So does the general fund, general government side of our general fund carry any school costs other than pension? I think we asked this, is a piece of what we pay on OPEB, the elementary school? I know it doesn't carry region. And I just, it would be good to get those numbers for the projected year when you can, Sean, not immediately, but just some sense of what is in general fund budget that is explicitly food on the operating budget. I know how to do it on the capital side.
Right. So when you say our budget, so town operating doesn't include school costs. If you're talking about like the big town budget, then the pension's there, but the pension's a separate line.
Right. So
on
that,
our summer. So that if you're looking at just town operating, that's just town operating. That doesn't
right, but so
include school
it's, but
expenses.
on the pension line, a piece of it is the school non-teaching.
Yeah, it's all of our pensions, right?
But there isn't anything on the health insurance side. Is that correct? Are we carrying?
No, health insurance is in each operating budget. So in the town operating budget has just the town health insurance, and the school operating budget has just the school health insurance.
And they have their health insurance for their retirees as well as for current?
Yeah, just like us. Yep.
Okay. Mandy.
When Paul says double digit projected increases, are we looking at low double digits like 10, 11, or are we looking at, I mean, high would be 99, but I'm assuming we'd never go that high, but like, or are we potentially looking at the 1920 that the last one came in at, or even above that? Do we have any idea when Maya says expect double digit, where in the range of double digits are we potentially seeing?
So you saw the Hampshire County was like 18% and then another 20%. So I don't think we're looking at that. Maya groups its entire pool and it rates it, and then it individualizes it, and they create a range and that they can meet. So they try to shave off the top and the bottom, to make it sort of, and they try to hold on to the best performers without, and so we don't know. I'm guessing it's still below 20%, but I don't know how much lower. And they don't know either, honestly. They look at claims as of September 30th, I think is what they start with.
But you haven't heard like the almost 40% that basically the Hampshire Insurance Group faced in 1 year.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't think that they're not there. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we'll turn to the next topic and request that Sean give us the updated spreadsheets. Sean, you talked about a few of the lines, and you can just give us just the revenue and the expenditures, just those rather than the whole piece, and that can be there for us to look at. So turning to indicators, guidelines. We have today, and then we have November 18th as the 2 November meetings before it's December. And so we've been working toward thinking about a much shorter guideline report that would look more like our executive summary did last year. We can still say some things in the text to explain it, but at least I think the several items that I'd like to turn over, if that's okay with everyone. I'm just looking at the time. It's 11. For discussion is first, are we talking about equal increases for all the main operating budgets or not? Yes or no on that one? Are we talking about 10.5 for capital? Yes or no on that? Staying with operating, is the elementary, whatever the percent is it to the base plus the extra we gave last year? Where the extra, we thought it was going to be a bridge because the 6th grade was going to lower the costs of operating the 3 schools. And what we're hearing is the way 6th grade is materializing, that's not likely to be. So is that 3.5 on a base that adds the one time, which is what we did last time for regional a year ago? So just on that. And then the other is we created some guidance in our guidelines of when the year closes and we get free class certified, where might we want it to go? And Mandy, in sort of in the context of all of this, had suggested, do we want to have a target spending for roads somewhere, between the capital budget and free cash? Last year, we suggested that some of the free cash roll over into the joint capital planning budget, just show it as more. If we did anything like that, do we need the 10.5 would be my question. If we shifted some over, same capital could come out of it. So those are operating budget, equal or not, and in the operating budget, does the elementary percent go on a consolidated base or not? And then capital, free cash, and do we want to say anything about roads and guidelines? And anyone else can put other topics on. Those were my high level talking in the guidelines. Mandy.
A couple of thoughts on each, but before I get to that, I think, am I the only Finance Committee BCG member? And if Andy is, but we go to BCG tomorrow, so what we talk about today is something I see us, me and I think Andy is BCG. So what we can bring to BCG tomorrow in terms of where our thinking is on guidelines, but also what would be really helpful from the other members is any questions or thoughts or ideas or information you would like from the other towns to help us set our guidelines, the other areas. So I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to take notes today so that hopefully we can have a productive BCG tomorrow, based on this conversation today. I'd like to add under the top ones, revenue projections and enterprise funds, into the big categories. For revenue projections, last year we had adjust them as more information with focus on areas where forecasts have been conservative. I'm not sure we need that as much this year, that focus on those revenue projections. I think we're seeing that adjustments already. So I'd be willing to consider dropping that, because I think we're seeing the results of that push last year, but we might want to considering that, containing that. I want to, for capital, keep it at a minimum of 10.5%. I think given the numbers we're seeing in financial indicators, we absolutely need that extra 0.5%. Given where the debts is going, and it was always based on a 10.5%, not the 10. At least for the last couple of years, we've been eyeing 10.5%. So I think we need to keep it. Some of that's going to school debt. We're starting to see other projects come on. I wouldn't want to decrease the capital. The elementary and the equal increases go together for me. And I think before I can comment on what I'm thinking on that. I really need more information from the superintendent and the elementary school committee, particularly with the elementary, because as Kathy said, we've been operating for the last 5 years or so on the assumption that the new consolidation would reduce expenses at the elementary school. Not that necessarily they need a lower budget by automatic, but that the year it came online, they might not need as big of an increase because of lower infrastructure costs. And so I think before I discuss, in my mind, before I can consider should the base include that one time that we did last year, and what about the increase to the elementary, say, I need more information from the schools as to really what their consolidated budget is looking like compare in terms of expenses and staffing, frankly, staffing levels because of a consolidated school and all compared to this year. And that's something I personally want to see if we can get an idea of at BCG, because without that, you know, if the consolidated school requires, say, 5 or 6 less staff no matter what, that's a difference in, quote, their estimated budget. And if it really does have no heating expenses or, you know, electricity expenses because it's a net zero building, well, that's a number that goes to zero, right? And that's about the amount, I believe, that was the quote one-time money in the current year's budget. And then if the rent at the middle school is per the current regional agreement, well, that's a whole lot lower than maybe some people were expecting, right? And so I need more information before I can comment on that piece personally.
Kathy,
So-
can I just build on that or just highlight one other?
Absolutely. I think everyone should react to that, because I have some questions to add to what she just said. Andy, go, and then should Sean go first, and then you,
This is
Andy?
just really specific to what Mandy just
So
said, which is
just staying with elementary, yeah.
just really, and just technical. I think you all will need to know the timing of when the school committee plans to release that building, because if they're planning on releasing that building, let's say next year, who's anticipated to carry the utility cost, whatever the costs are of keeping that building, even though it's going to be empty, there's still going to be some cost to maintaining that building. And are those costs going to reside in the school budget, or is there some expectation they might reside in the municipal budget? Because we don't have a budget for that. So Paul, I don't know if you have any update on the timing
You're talking about Wildwood, right?
Wildwood, yeah. Because the new school theoretically will have lower costs, but if they're anticipating turning that back over to the town, you know, in September, we have to make sure there's a budget for that somewhere.
And at least at one point, just on that, Paul, what had been floated was swing space for DPW, and I have no idea whether that's still on the table. Since I don't know where the DPW built, you know, it was Sean potentially having humans in it called DPW staff. Yeah.
So we didn't really, I mean, that's a potential. We have other locations for DPW as well. So whether we want to spin up that whole building, it really is if we're going to decommission the building or not. We have looked at utilizing parts of the building and without running up the boiler or anything like that. So there are different options available for sure.
So Andy, is yours still on this same topic of elementary? Because if not, I have one more thing to add.
It's just that you were listing the general topics that we eventually need to talk about. Somebody's going to raise the override question, and we've always been, as long as I can remember, saying no overrides. But I think we need to be prepared for that discussion.
Okay, I added to this. So I just, Alicia, if you don't mind, I just want to add to Mandy's, because I think it might be good, Mandy, to, before we end today, have some fairly specific questions about the elementary, you know, including timing on, because this is still in flux on what's happening with the 6th grade, but when are they actually going to know? And your question about the rent and, you know, moving people into the 2 building, you know, going from 3 buildings to 2 buildings for everything but 6th grade. I think that's still in flux. So, but we would need to add for some specifics for it. And I know Shannon had told us she was working on a whole new budgeting process because she's going to have different kinds of accounts. So I just want to make sure we get our questions so that if you're asking them tomorrow at BCG, you're asking them for us as a group as well. Alicia.
Thank you, Kathy. I think you sort of said what I was going to say in terms of asking for a little bit more specific information in terms of like what that transition's going to look like might be helpful. But I also would urge us as a committee not to sort of jump to matching our budget expectations to what the projected outcome is there, because I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of space for some risk and transition management, because we don't know if things are going to turn out exactly how we expect them to turn out, or how long it will take for us to see those kinds of changes in our budget. So I wouldn't want to necessarily budget for that expected change immediately, but I do think it would be helpful for us to have that information up front. Um, and yeah, it would be helpful. I know Mandy Jo would probably do this anyways, but it would be helpful to just hear what you all talk about at BCG, because I'm also curious as to how the other towns are going to approach budgeting for the elementary school, just considering what happened last year. I'm leaning towards wanting to keep the same sort of language that we used in our guidelines last year around the increase. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about the elementary school for now.
And just if people do or don't remember last year, what we did is on regional, we said to the extent there's free cash, the first free cash goes to moving that back up to the base. In this case, it was on regional. We moved it back into the base. So, Elisha, I think that's what you were referencing, and it feels like if we're once we get to draft guidelines, if our draft doesn't have full knowledge of what we're asking about on the elementary, we could write it on elementary option A and option B, depending on what comes out of their determination. Because regional, if we're paying rent to the region, that may also help the regional budget. You know, it's income on space. And we gave money for the retrofit of it out of the capital budget. So I have no idea how any of that interacts with the budgeting on the regional side or the budgeting on the elementary school side. You know, they are going from principal and assistant principal in 3 schools to two principals, 2 assistant principals. So, man, you know, in terms of which lines are changing, but over in the 6th grade, there's an administrative overhead that they have to at the same time figure out. So that what I heard as questions was, you know, how near are they to know with some projection on what the plan is with the 6th grade in terms of rent and carrying costs for that, and the potential savings for the K through 5 in the other schools. And the third part of it is decommissioning, or what happens to Wildwood, who's carrying the Wildwood costs, whatever that cost might be. Sean's assumption was the lights can still go on and it's being heated. You know, are we really just locking the door? Or is there some amount of low level keeping the pipes from freezing, you know, utility costs going on in the building? So those, Mandy, that's my quick list of the kinds of questions, and I see your hand is up.
Yeah, the other thing regarding the 6th grade, at least, is the shared costs of, well, the shared employees, because in theory that reduces the region costs and potentially, I don't want to say increases the elementary cost, but any shared employee, like it sounds like the principal, at least at this point, is planned on being shared. And if the nurse is shared, or that if some of those employee costs that are 100% owned, for example, to use an awful word, by the region right now, become 75% owned by the region and 25% by the elementary district, the region costs also have a net potential decrease. Again, that doesn't mean their budget decreases for next year, but I think that goes into the question of equal increases as we look at, well, what would have this year's operating budget look like if those certain employees costs were decreased by 25% or whatever. And so then to build on how much is then getting built into that. So I think it's not just the rent that the region might be receiving, but it's also the removal of employee costs from the region to the elementary, and how does that comport with the elementary and all.
I think that's right. And you listed a few, and it's not been clear to me whether they think they can share in the current ELL program in the region, in the middle school, to kids who have ELL, any special needs staff. Is there enough is there staff time available to handle, or are we, so all of that, Mandy, is in the shared, you gave a few examples, but for any of it, because that helps the region. It means the sixth grade's more expensive, but it helps the region. So I think, is everyone comfortable if Mandy just poses those questions in terms of us planning at this meeting? And since it will have some representatives from the region there, and it definitely has the superintendent there, they won't be able to answer the questions, but we can say, we need this to help us think through guidelines. I see, Paul, your hand is up.
I guess just logistically, do you want to funnel your questions, any other questions that members of the finance committee might have, to Sean, and he can sort of formally relay them to the school committee, or do you want one of your members to relay those to the school committee? Who should the school committee be or school staff be expecting to get questions from? We want to be organize that so they're not getting like three different people calling them.
I think, well, Mandy, I'll let you react. Sean has a relationship with Shannon, so I also think, in the past, these questions have gone through Paul to the superintendent, or finance director to finance director. Yeah.
Yeah, I would suggest finance director would gather the questions and forward them off.
But then it would be good for them to be voiced at the meeting that happens tomorrow, so just, yeah. Mandy, does that work for you?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking I'd just bring them up tomorrow, but yeah, if they want them ahead of time. I mean, I haven't received any questions, or I'm not sure we've received questions from the school preparing for BCG. So are we supposed to be sending questions for BCG early to all staff? Is one question. And if we are, I'm perfectly fine with Sean sending it on. That makes sense to me. We've never done that.
Yeah, I
haven't heard that expectation.
I thought what you had said is there's information I need before I can establish financial guidelines from the schools, and that those are the questions.
Yeah, I was going to bring them up at BCG tomorrow.
Okay. I mean,
But
if you want to do it formally through staff, I think that I would suggest that, so it's written down somewhere. And but it's up to you how you want to handle that.
I'm happy for Sean to send them through, as long as we also get to bring them up at BCG tomorrow.
For sure. Yeah, agree.
Maybe what I'll do is just document them all tomorrow, because I'm sure there'll be other things that come up. So I'll take good notes tomorrow of everything that comes up, and then I'll send an email afterwards, kind of saying a recap of here's all the things requested by the finance committee.
What time is the BCG meeting, and are we allowed to attend it?
12 o'clock.
It's
12 o'clock.
noon
Yeah.
to 2-ish, and it's an open meeting, so
It's a public meeting.
it's a public meeting.
Thank you.
So with that as an overarching question, as I did our schedule, November 18th is our only other meeting before December. And Mandy voiced, maybe I'll just go through all the big topics that I raised, because if we're doing just an overview and a shorter piece, and I see both Bob and Alicia's, the question is, do we have enough time on the 18th? Should it be a longer meeting? And it is 10 in the morning meeting, or do we need another meeting? But before I get to that, Mandy spoke up on, I want to keep 10.5. She felt that was a bottom line for her. I didn't hear anyone talk about equal or not. And then Andy wants to add a topic. I think what you were saying is add a topic on override, just a paragraph on it, Andy, on a override or not discussion. And that's, to me, that's an easy thing to write. I certainly wouldn't be comfortable recommending an override, but talking about where we are. So Bob and Elisha, on how we get from 11:11 this morning to a rough draft by the end of the meeting on the November 18th. Bob.
So I think we can just do what we did last year in terms of the Proposition 2.5 override. We just had a bullet there. I'll just read it. Do not consider a Proposition 2.5 override to support the budget. I think that's, if we all agree that that's the case, then that's all I think we need to say in our guidelines. I am a little concerned about going ahead with 3.5% increase given all the uncertainties. And I'll ask Sean or Paul to weigh in. Are you comfortable still with 3.5%, or should we hedge our bets a little and put in 3% with, like we did last year, and then we can go up above that as data allow us to do so?
So Paul asked the same question before we presented it, at the financial indicator. So, yes, I still think we are being appropriately conservative in our projections, both on the expense side and on the revenue side. The one caveat is state aid, and one caveat is state aid. Right now, again, we're projecting flat. So if it's, if we get what we've gotten in past years, that'll give us a little bit more room, and we might, have the ability to adjust upward. But there's just a big unknown there with how the federal funding will impact the state. I've read a bunch of recent articles that it's going to be potentially pretty bad, especially on the healthcare front and on how they fund health insurance throughout the state. So that's the one big unknown. So obviously it's up to you all what you want to do for budget guidelines, but I would say based on what I know today, we're comfortable with the 3.5%, but there are some unknowns out there.
Elisha.
Thank you. I was going to come back to something Mandy Jo brought up about free cash for road improvements. And I was wondering, I think, Paul, you're working on like some type of road paving planning document. And I'm wondering when that will be presented to us.
Yeah, so we don't have a date certain for that, but listening to this kind of conversation, it seems like it needs to be sooner than later. I wasn't sure if didn't have the conversation with the president of the council yet in terms of whether it's going to be this council or the next council. It sounds like we'd rather do it sooner than later, but I can have that discussion with her.
Well, I think.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kathy.
No, I would just think, Alicia, if we were to say we wanted a target of at least this on roads, we wouldn't want to set it in a way that we couldn't achieve it, and part of that is, are we giving guidance about using free cash once it's certified for roads? And Alicia, I think that's where like, what kind of numbers are we talking about? What's a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year plan, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where I was going with this, is like it would be helpful to understand like what physically can happen in the next budget year so that we can sort of understand that reality and align our expectations or our recommendations with that if we do decide to recommend a number from free cash.
And my request, Paul, it's, as you know, I lost last year in terms of making sure we put Chapter 90 in terms of how much money do we have? Do we have this current year? We're not sure what we're going to have next current year, but just putting it as in addition to what we are allocating out of our own budgets. So we get a better sense of what, and now when Sean just went quickly through Amherst, has given us some money for roads and sidewalks downtown. So that's roads money. I mean, it's a targeted roads money, and it may be one time, but just getting some sense, because some people are still looking at our joint capital plan, the 5-year plan, and just that one line, which Sean, Chapter 90 was taken out of it. So they look at how low we went compared to future years, but we're not as low as it looks. So I just want to give as accurate a picture as we can to the public. And I'm seeing Sean's hand is up and Paul's hand is up, probably still on roads. So both, either one.
Do you want to go first, Paul?
So, yeah, the goal is to give you a comprehensive picture on roads. And just to clarify, the Amherst College money is not for roads. It's for infrastructure improvements in the business district. It can be all kinds of things. It
Okay.
can be for streetlights. It can be benches. It can be sidewalks. It can be lots of different things. So I would not put this into the
Okay.
calculation. This is for roads. And there was something else. I forget, it'll come to me later.
Yeah, and just on the plan, so I did have a initial conversation with Guilford and Athena on the timing of that presentation. I know they're updating the assessment of the condition assessment of the roads. We were kind of preliminarily thinking February 1 because a new council and giving them time to get acclimated, but having it done in advance of JCPC starting so that any plan that the council receives that they kind of give a thumbs up to could be folded into the JCPC work as well.
Mandy and then Paul.
Paul can go if it's still on roads. My question's
It's
not
not.
about roads.
No.
Oh, okay. I want to move to enterprise funds. We had 2 quick paragraphs in the budget guidelines last year that talked about sort of making sure rates are sufficient to balance projected and unanticipated expenses and costs. Because we had an FY24 sewer deficit, which we didn't want to see again. I haven't seen the enterprise fund FY25s yet. So I think we need to keep that in there for now until we see. But I have a question about enterprise funds and salaries as it relates to these budget guidelines and enterprise fund rates. We have heard in many budget years, particularly with DPW, but with other parts of our budget and staffing levels, that our salaries are hard to keep up with. They're not necessarily out of line with other towns around here, but that they're hard to keep up with private and other towns in other parts. And I think we've heard it a lot with the water and sewer employees because they're much more specialized than other parts of DPW. So my question is, and this, I don't know whether it goes to union stuff or not, is there a way, since the water and sewer are enterprise funds, to increase the salaries of those employees through the enterprise fund sewer and water rates so that we can make the salaries for those employees more competitive in hopes of being able to cut down on the number of empty chairs, say, in those positions, and also maybe improve retention in those. And should we then, if that is possible, and I don't know whether it is regarding union stuff, right? But if it is possible, should we as a finance committee potentially recommend that in our budget guidelines of increasing sort of the salary schedules for our enterprise fund employees and paying for it with rates? Because in the long run, it might actually help retain and decrease then sort of training costs and stuff like that.
Paul.
Yeah, so to respond to that first, I would ask the finance committee and the council not to weigh in on collective bargaining issues. That is all, you already have weighed in on that in the past. They are using that in terms of through our mediation process. The goals that you're announcing, Counselor, is in agreement with that in terms of, we don't want to see turnover. That's not an interest of the town. We want to make sure our salaries are competitive. The there are 2 DPW unions. They represent all the employees of the DPW. They need to get a majority of all the employees to approve a contract. We can't unilaterally just increase individuals' wages. That's outside the collective bargaining agreement. So we are looking at lots of different ways to do that, and I think you hit the nail on the head that, licensed positions are of more value when you have licenses, um, in every community. And so we want to reward people who are able to get and or bring licenses to the table. It's all negotiation in terms of what the union will support and what we can afford. So, and as you know, we're in mediation, so we can't really talk in detail about that. Um, but I would say that the union does bring things that you say into the negotiation. So, and that's their right. We say it publicly as a council. So, but I think it's a complex negotiation. I think the goals that you articulate are 100% ours. Turnover is tough. We don't want to do it. It's really we're trying to do everything we can within the constraints of the contract to increase wages and be consistent with our practices. The other thing I want to mention, this is a different topic, was the 3.5%. The concern I have with that is that in the past, when we've made a projection on what we think we can afford, we were 90% certain that we would never have to reduce that projection. I think what we are putting ourselves in danger of is if the state comes in January with a budget that reduces things, we might be saying 3.5%, but I just want people to be well aware that we might have to say, whoops, we're going to go down to 3% because of health insurance or because of this or that, the other thing. We've never really been in that position because we've been so extraordinarily conservative. But listening to the council and the finance guidelines to say tighten up those projections, we are. So there's less cushion there. So just be aware that the downside of doing that is that there is the potential that we will have to reduce the expectations as we get into the budget process.
Okay, I'm writing that down. That this warning can go in our guidelines. Yeah, we can express that. Andy and then Mandy.
Just a quick question to Paul on what he just said. Isn't the health insurance ultimately paid out of each of the operating budgets, and therefore, if there's an increase, it affects how the schools and how we as municipality and the library deal with our operating budgets, but it doesn't. Why would it affect the 3.5%?
I'm more referencing if our revenues drop for any reason, or the new growth is even worse than we think, or if the state comes in and starts reducing budgets, because I think that's the biggest danger right now is the state with a third of their budget coming from the federal government and the actions that they might start to take.
And Mass Health is a big portion of their budget. So if Mass Health, the funding sources they have to support that becomes
just when we say it, we need to say it because of concerns about revenue.
Yeah, no, that's the way
Yep.
that's the way I wrote it
That's
down.
yeah.
That's how I wrote it down, Andy. And it can be written in a way about revenues, and then on the flip side, if health insurance goes up, it means there's going to be a squeeze on everything else, even if we can maintain 3.5, which is the year we just went through. Health insurance gobbled up money for everything else. Meaning wages, people. Yeah.
Okay.
So, so what I've heard so far, so no one has weighed in on equal or not. We have talked about the discussion around whether elementary goes on to the base or not, and use of excess free cash, getting roads in with some kind of target and some encouraging for free cash to be used when we certify it for roads to meet those targets. Saying something quick about override. And then one person spoke out strongly for staying with 10.5 for capital. Bob.
Yeah, I agree with the 10.5 for capital. I agree with equal funding. I think it's the simplest way to deal with the budgets. I could go either way on the elementary school on whether we include the gift as a base. there's some precedent for that. There's also precedent for not doing so. So I think that's something that I think we need more information about where the savings, if we're going to see any savings, how much savings, and all the questions that Mandy brought up, in terms of how the sixth grade in the middle school is going to work financially for either for the elementary schools versus the regional schools. I think all those things need to be known before we can really kind of decide how much money we need to put into the schools.
Okay, Andy?
I agree with everything that Bob said, so I don't need to repeat it.
Alicia?
Yes, can you remind me the language we used last year regarding the equal percentage increases? I know we didn't do the equal percentage increases, but what was the language we used in the uh, memo?
So, Alicia, actually, in the guidelines, we did do equal, and the one in addition we said was what was in the projections from the year before is the regional had one-time money that wasn't in the base, and we said increase the base up to that and apply the amount and use free cash to bring that up. So that would be the first use of free cash. So we, in essence, upped the base for regional and then applied it. The time when we departed from equal was in the spring, in March, with the council coming in with aim higher. So that was when we changed off of equal. And I just want to mention one thing that one of the towns in the region said if Amherst goes to 3.5 and we keep the assessment method that we're on, they have to do an override. They can't come up with their money. So for them, 3.5 was a big number. I'm just putting that out as an observation by one of the small towns. So Alicia, that was where, if you look at what we and the council then drafted in December, we stayed with equal, where the one that actually got a more than equal because it wasn't in the base was regional. So it because the base didn't have this extra amount in it. So I hope, was that clear what I just said?
Yeah, that was a helpful reminder. I'm just wondering, aside from possibly hearing updates from the BCG meeting at our next finance committee meeting, when will we hear from folks in terms of what their needs are for the next fiscal year? I just want to ensure that the language we're using doesn't set us up to be in a place to not be able to pivot or adjust. That is my main concern.
No, I understood your question. Well, we're hoping that we get more information out of BCGs. Clearly, I'll just stay and then go to Mandy. 3.5 is going to be tough, extremely tough for the entire town. If health insurance comes in, so we're going to be talking about a squeeze on the town side of the budget, which police, fire, CRES, finance department, because health insurance last year already competed with the fact that everyone's got steps and we have people. So if you remember, we ended up at 4% last year. So if you think of 4 forced that, 3.5 will be that intensity again. That's just a reminder on, it's not just the schools, but it's the town. The library is the one which is such a small part of our budget because of their situation. They're still in a temporary thing, but whether they're at 3 or 3.5 is small change in terms of the total budget. So I don't know whether that's helpful, Alicia, because last time we didn't have, that means freeze the following positions across various departments to have the town live within that amount of money. So that is again going to be the situation with only a 3.5, and we've got the risk that it might go lower if the state money doesn't come in.
Yeah, that's helpful. And maybe I can think about this between now and our next finance committee meeting, but I'm just again concerned with our language sort of fixing us into a place there. So not that I'm necessarily against having that be the recommendation, but that I would like the language to allow for some flexibility if need be. But I can think about that.
Okay, and what, and Mandy, let me just call on Mandy, because I think what I'll do, I'll offer that I can do for the committee to set us up for the 18th. Go ahead, Mandy.
Just a couple of things, some based on what Counselor Walker was just talking about thoughts wise, but and a answer to one question Counselor Walker asked, and then some other thoughts. Last year, the financial, the budget guidelines for the region, well, for the guidelines in general, because it had one-time money that we had stated specifically in FY24 or 25 was one time. And so what we actually said was not take it out of free cash. It was when you update all of the financial projections sheets, the first
Okay.
thing you do if there's additional money is add
Okay.
the one-time money is we worded it as first prioritize including the full FY25 region assessment for Amherst in the region's FY25 base to
Okay.
calculate the 3% year over year. That's how we worded it last
Yeah,
year in the guidelines.
I misspoke, yeah.
So I just wanted to clear that up. I think this year the guidelines actually, given what we're hearing from the manager, from Paul and Sean, is we actually have to discuss, instead of in many years we've said, oh, if there's extra additional, I don't know whether we did it last year, if there's additional money in terms of things for the municipal budget, the town side of the budget, think about adding these positions or adding more money this way. I don't think we can do that this year. I think that paragraph probably needs to disappear. I think what we need to say instead is give us a long-term plan of how, with these insurance increases, we're going to manage the frankly projected cuts in staffing. And also I'm getting more and more concerned that there's the employee side, the salary side, and then there's the sort of expense side of each department's budget. And the expense side has not been being increased at all, yet expenses are going. I think we need to make some sort of note about whether we actually want the expense side to be brought up to where current expenses are, which will again then potentially decrease the number of staff members we can have, depending on how the budget works. So I think we actually have to spend some time on what we want to see from the manager in terms of long-term planning for expenses that do not fit into 3.5% increases, and what we want to see from him as we discuss those cuts, because it's going to be cuts. Some things for tomorrow. I still want a little bit to piggyback on what Kathy said. I want a little bit more information from the region's finance director or business manager on what the percentage, the current guess of the percentage splits of the assessment will be. Because if Amherst's percentage of that total assessment is decreasing again, then that actually puts a whole lot more pressure on the small towns. And our 3.5% projection might not actually be, in the end, the driving number around what the total assessment is in the region, because the other towns would be facing much more than 3.5 or 4%. With us, they'd be facing 5, 6, 7, 8, depending on how, if our portion of that assessment percentage wise is decreasing. If our portion is increasing, our number might be the driver. But I would like to know where our guess is in that. I know it's not set in stone, but I think that would help some of that conversation to know, is our portion of that assessment going down or not. And then another question for tomorrow is the library. Kathy brought that up. I think FY27 is when they might be moving buildings again. And if that's the case, I think some of the questions we had for the elementary school also come in for the library in terms of helping us guess and better estimate costs. And are they facing larger, smaller, same, things like that. I don't have it as well worded, but when they move back into Jones, what does their new budget realities look like in terms of you know, utility costs and stuff like that, and maintenance costs and janitorial costs, things like that. So I'm going to add that to my list of questions for tomorrow. Thanks.
Andy.
Yeah, as far as the regional budget and the regional allocations of the assessment, I don't think we're going to have the kind of shifts that we had last year, because it was a massive change that came about when DESE came in and said, you can't do what you have been doing before. You need to go more towards what the statutory framework is for setting the budgets. So I think that we probably need to be more posing it as a question for Shannon to give us some guidance on, that tells us, what she expects to happen, assuming that the DESE rules are going to be the same as they were in the current year. And I don't know what Sean thinks.
Yeah, Sean, Andy, just on what Mandy's point, if we stay on the assessment method, that was the big jump, going back to it. A 1% shift on Amherst is a lot of money. So it just on the 5-year moving average plus EQV, staying on that. So yes, it was even worse last year, but a 1% shift, if we went down 1%, if you calculate it, it shifts a lot of money onto the other 3 towns. So that's where, Mandy, I think that's where you were going.
I can explain it very quickly. Our 0.9% shift in how much our percentage of the total assessment was between FY25 and FY26, before a single dollar was added to the total assessment, our lower 0.9% thing, that's the raw numbers, that's not with the guardrails or anything, resulted in Pelham starting 7.5% higher, Leverett starting 3.4% higher, and Shutesbury starting 2.1% higher, before you added a single dollar to the total assessment. So think of it this way: if Amherst generally pays $80 of a $100 assessment, and we now only have to pay $79, our percentage went down, our contribution went down $1, which a year over year is a little over 1%. But that means the other 3 towns' contribution went up from $20 to $21, which is 5% to begin with. I think it is 2.5%, 5, 20 to 21. They added $1. It's 5%. 5%. To begin with, before you even changed that $100 to $101. And that's what I'm concerned about, because that structural change, that's not a change in assessment method. That's just the change in each policy. And I think if they are facing as a town, if we go down another 1%, which is what we went from 25 to 26, they start 5% higher, no matter what. And then if we're trying to add 3.5% on top of that, they're facing much larger percentages than we are. And that's going to drive their ability to pay, because they might be, if we're trying to increase 3.5%, they might be facing 8, 9, 10, 11% increases if our portion of the total assessment went from 80 to 79 or from 79 to 78. And that's what I'm trying to get at, to figure out how bad our 3.5% might be for the other towns before we even know the number.
So anyway, it's a math question. So I think we can come back to adding that piece. I see Bob's hand is up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when Sharon came to the council about the new building, she said the only staffing change they would need would be one additional custodian. I don't know whether that's the case now or not, but that's what she said, based on, what the information they had at the time.
And then when she came to us with the budget in May, she said she was short, she's going to be short by 3. So the number went up. Yes, Bob, there was some changes along the way, but so here's what, I'm looking just to see if there are any other hands, and I'm also looking at my watch. What I would propose that I do is take the Word document called guidelines and do a track change edit, where I take out some of the words, and sections and leave some pieces so that we are coming back to work office. So right now, what I've heard is equal with a discussion on what happens to elementary and and some warning about the 3.5, which will be different than we've ever done before. Advice against an override. And I didn't hear anyone, I would be willing to go less than 10.5 on capital. So Mandy said she wouldn't be willing to go there. I would be willing. So I'm just going to leave it at 10.5 and ask for a discussion on that and explain why, because I think we might need it for the operating budget. And the reason I would argue for that is I would want to start to draw down on the capital fund to start funding DPW and pull that money into JCPC as a line, which right now is pulling on against that 10.5. If you look at the table, DPW is a big number. And if we said we're bringing $1 million over, I'm not going to say the number, but if we're going to start to take some of that money. And when Sean built that fund up, he thought of paying cash for a fire station. But the question was, do we want to start using that reserve? And does that allow us to go to less than 10.5 for a couple years to ease the operating budget side? So this could be a contingency, but it's one of the things I'd like to discuss next time. So I'll leave it as 10.5 with maybe a draft paragraph. So I'll try to get to a shorter document so then we can focus. And then we'd have a report back from BCG, and see whether we can get to a full draft after a 2-hour discussion on the 18th. So does anyone think that, we're not talking about a lot of variables or a lot of words here. It's just what the words say is what we have to think. And within the 18th, if there's really not a lot of room to add another meeting, other than the council meets on the December 2nd, we might not, when we meet again on December 2nd, we might not be finished. So we might have to continue the discussion on the 2nd. But my hope would be we get to a draft that then could be shared with everyone. So I don't know if anyone has any other suggestions, but that is, last year, I think, I'd have to look at our timing. I don't think we were completely finished by that December meeting. I think we were still discussing. But it's the only thing I would think we have on the agenda, Sean. We don't have any financial orders coming to us, correct?
You don't discuss the classification hearing, I don't believe. So no, I don't think there's anything else on the agenda.
So the full 2 hours of the next meeting will be on guidelines, and Sean will give us the rough how some of these numbers changed.
I'm trying to remember. You don't remember. We don't there's not a follow-up on the classification hearing and
No.
on the votes that the council has to take on the tax rate, right? That's just all done at the council level.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to remember what we used to do, but I think that's all done at the council level.
Kathy, our guidelines last year were dated the 16th of December. So
That's what I thought. I thought, I think that was certainly when the council finally voted on them. But I think when the council saw them first, we still had some more work to do.
Yeah.
Bob. Yeah, and yeah, Mandy.
To follow up or support Counselor Walker's request. I think the agenda for the next meeting needs to also include an update from BCG as a separate agenda item.
Yeah,
So it's not rolled into budget guidelines.
No, I was going to make that, spoke quickly. I would make that the first thing on the item.
Okay.
The first agenda would report from BCG, and then the rest of the meeting would be guidelines. Exactly. I wouldn't roll it in. And I'll see how far I get. And nobody, but I think last time I also tried to go lower than 10.5 and nobody else wanted to. So I'm not anticipating that there'll be others who think this is a good idea, but I just wanted to say that I will speak to that when we meet again.
Hey, Kathy, perhaps we can phrase it that we want it to be 10.5, but if there are unforeseen circumstances, maybe we need to go lower. You know, I'd be willing to say something like that because we don't know. I'm still uncomfortable with the 3.5%, but I'm willing to go with it as, you know, what our what we prefer, but I hate to go in January or February and say it can only be 3%.
So that's where you said we have some flexibility in the 10.5 that could
Right.
hold. We could hold the 3.5 maybe if we go lower than the 10.5. If we lose revenues on the, yeah, I understand where you're going with that. And that's actually Paul went lower in his budget to find the money for the regional schools last time. I mean, it was kind of a miracle that he managed to not axe a project but go lower on 10.5. So and Sean, the other, I guess the other one that we're expecting to see when you close the year, we would see certified fourth quarter and certified free cash. So would that be the 18th of November, or would that be December, the first week in December?
That'll be December.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm right that it's BCG and guidelines is the agenda for next time. And Sean will add this, and it'd be great if you add those two tables, Sean, because those are the tables I work off of in any case, you know.
Yeah, I'll email them to the group as soon as we get done here.
So any other questions? Or comments? So I said I would see whether there are any public comments since there was no public at the beginning. So we're going to be open for public comments if there are any right now. So there are two attendees. If either one of you would like to make a comment, raise your hand. I don't see any hands up, so I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Henneke. I'll do, Kathy is a yes. Bob?
Aye.
Counselor Henneke?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
We are adjourned at whatever time it is, 11:49.